Hey everybody, Joe here from Airguns and More. I'm at my workbench today and I really wanted to take apart this Mercury Airtact. The plan is to disassemble it and clean it from the inside, also degrease it and then assemble it again just to see what kind of difference it makes. So stay tuned. So the first thing we want to do is turn over the airgun and unscrew the three main screws that hold the stock in place. There are two in the front and one in the back. In order for us to do that, we'll need a screwdriver with a crosshead, and I also like to use an extension, like so. One thing I didn't mention was that I'm using a PH1 crosshead. Put your screws aside. And now you're ready to remove the stock. I actually put the gun butler aside at this point and used these two wooden blocks that I made. I grinded them down to the size of the airgun system, and I also put some leather on top to prevent scratches. I continue the disassembly by taking this small spring out. For that I'm using a small flathead screwdriver. Slowly push it out, put it aside, and flip the airgun over. I then go on to use two small flathead screwdrivers to take out the two discs that hold the pin in place. The first one tends to be a little tricky to remove. That's the first one. And there's the second one. So once that's done, we take out the pin I mentioned earlier and flip the airgun over so we can remove this part of the safety mechanism. Next we go on to remove the spring from the second part of the safety mechanism. And we also remove it from the cocking lever. Now we go on to remove this pin that holds the trigger and the spring in place by using a 3mm punch and a hammer. I actually put some tape around my punch to reduce scratches. I would advise you to leave the punch in like that because of the spring tension. When that's done, just put the pin aside so you don't lose it. And in my case, I know there's not a lot of spring tension and that I can get away with it this way. So I just break the barrel and the spring as well as the trigger comes out. Now we come to the point where we remove the barrel and the cocking lever from the receiver tube. Therefore we need to unscrew these two screws. The first one needs to be screwed out with a crosshead and the second one with a flathead. I'm using a size 6 flathead for the second one. which seems to be also the pin that holds the barrel in place. This pin can be hard to turn, and it can only be screwed out till a certain point until we need our punch and our hammer to get it out. Carefully tap it out. And once the pin is out, we put it aside and apply a bit pressure to get the punch back out. Now we can carefully disassemble the barrel and the cocking lever from the receiver tube. Also pay attention to the two discs on the sides of the barrel. Another thing, make sure these two discs don't come flying around your house, because you need them later on. Now take a screwdriver or something like that to remove the piston. And you can already tell how dirty it is, so I'm gonna clean this up. I simply use a paper towel to clean up the piston. Wrap it in the paper towel. And then go on to twist and turn it in there. Also make sure to keep the seal clean, because sometimes there's some factory grease on top of the seal. I also cleaned the piston from the inside, therefore I used some paper towel again and a screwdriver. I wrapped the paper towel around the screwdriver and you can see what kind of results I got. I don't think you need to do it, but in my case I just did it. However, one thing I feel like you should do is clean the top of the piston seal. Therefore I'm using a small screwdriver again and some paper towel, because you will be able to see how tricky it is to get it out. And this idea fits pretty good. You can already see how much grease we're getting out of it. There's actually an interesting feature I noticed, because I was thinking this only had a 11mm dovetail rail, but it looks like it also has a 22mm Picatinny rail just underneath the dovetail rail. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's still made out of plastic, but it's a nice feature it has. And if you want to get rid of the plastic cover with the rail, you'll need a T10 head to unscrew this pin. So if you did that, you're good to remove it. However, I don't know if you can assemble the rifle again without the plastic cover. I then put the pin aside and cleaned the receiver tube. Therefore I used some paper towel that I wrapped around a small metal pipe but you could also use like a wooden stick or something like that. And then just push it in. And twist it and turn it in there to get all the dirt out. And this is what the paper towel looks like after I cleaned the receiver tube. So after I disassembled the rifle, I went ahead and put some seal grease onto the piston seal. As soon as that was done, I went and made a piston sleeve out of a plastic foil I had laying around. Here you can see me cutting out these small triangles with a pair of scissors. Next I pulled the small plastic triangles out with a pair of pliers. At this point it was time to fit the piston sleeve into the piston, so therefore you want to roll it up and push it into the piston with the plastic triangles we just cut out facing inwards. That just helps with the fit. Further on I also put a metal disc in there, as you can see, and you can simply use your spring to push it in and to make sure that everything is in place. Another thing I did was buy a new spring for the rifle. And when I fitted the new spring onto the spring guide, I could immediately tell it had a way better fit than the old spring. Here's the fit of the old spring in comparison. And due to the metal to plastic friction between the spring guide and the spring, I also put some moly onto the spring guide. As soon as we're done with that, we're ready to fit the spring onto the spring guide. Now that that's done, we can take our piston and our new spring and see what kind of fit we get with the shim inside. As you can see, it's a really smooth one. The only thing I'm also going to do is put some grease on top of the spring and then fit it inside the piston. Alright, so now we come to the point where I put the piston back into the receiver tube, like so. I'm using a piece of plastic foil to prevent seal damage that is due to the sharp edges of the receiver tube. Now I'm pushing the piston seal down with a screwdriver to prevent the same thing from happening. Now we can pull out the plastic foil. And this small piece of plastic foil pretty much serves the same purpose. We really don't want any damage on the piston seal. Now that that's done, we can push the piston in all the way, like so. Another thing that you can do is put some grease into the receiver tube with the piston already being in there, like I do. And when you apply the grease, make sure you spread it nicely. And then I noticed that I can push the piston even in further. So I took my screwdriver and did so. And then I went ahead and applied a bit more of it, even deeper in there. That just helps to reduce the friction between metal to metal. We're going to continue our process with putting on some spring grease onto our new spring. And that's pretty helpful to reduce spring vibration and ultimately leads to a smoother shot cycle and quieting the air gun down a lot. Same goes here. Make sure you spread the grease nicely. And I also wouldn't be greedy with the grease. When that's done, you want to grab your receiver tube and your rail, fit it on the receiver tube. Make sure you get the right fit by checking if the holes are aligned. And then it's time to grab your little screw to attach the rail to the receiver tube. Like so. Now you want to go and grab your two discs. And apply some metal to plastic grease on the part where the disc will be fitted on. Place the disc on top. And turn the barrel over. And pretty much do the same thing over there. Apply some of your metal to plastic grease. Fit the disc on top. And apply some of your metal to metal grease onto the disc. Make sure you do the same on the opposite side. Just like so. Now you want to grab your receiver tube and place the barrel in there with the cocking lever also being in the right place. This tends to be a little bit tricky because those two discs still need to be in place and they fall out easily. That's why you should put the cocking lever in first and then worry about fitting the barrel with the two discs fitting at the right place. Like so. So now you want to push your barrel down in order to fit the main pin of the airgun. And to ultimately push it in there all the way. Now you want to take your screwdriver in order to screw the pin in all the way. Because as mentioned earlier, it's halfway a pin and halfway a screw. So you need to push it in first and then screw it in. Now I'm changing the screwdriver head over to the cross head. To fit the cross-headed screw. And this small cross-headed screw needs to be screwed in right underneath the pin we just screwed in. With that being done, we want to take our receiver tube and place the new spring inside. Like so. And then I just put the trigger guard in place. And from that point on, it's ready to be put into a spring compressor. So now that I put the spring inside of the gun off camera, I'm going to take this part of the safety mechanism and fit it on here. Then I need to take the small pin and fit it in the trigger guard. A small screwdriver, like the one I'm using, tends to be helpful for that. Now I attach the spring from the trigger guard onto the second part of the safety mechanism. And next I take the small discs and place them on the pin like they were placed before. Then I just take the spring, place it in a small hole, push it down a bit, and then you're good to put the stock back on. So now that we got it back together, we're gonna put it back into the stock. Just like that. Take the last one. Screw it in right here. Just like that. And that's it. So I got the Mercury / Hatsan Airtact right over here, and I want to see what kind of difference we made with the cocking and the shot cycle. So let's take 3 shots. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really happy with the results if I compare how it sounded before to how it sounds now in caulking, but also in shooting. This was a huge success for me. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.